print it out. Run it. Okay, there's something wrong with your kernel. So I'm just gonna have you kernel on the top, restart, and just run all. You might get some errors at the end if you haven't got to that question, but other than that, scroll up back to the problem. Hey, there you go.
Right.
Yeah, it was an error in your data hub.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think our section is over, so we're just going to pass it to the next person, next TAs.
Thank you for your help.
No problem.
Hey guys, we're going to begin in a bit.
Hi, Paul.
Hey. I guess we can begin. You want to just share your stuff?
Yeah, okay. Give me a second. Okay, we can start. So welcome to Coding Lab 3. We are going to talk about a few of the FAQs that some of you have asked over the past few days. And then Paul is going to do a coding demo on lists, tuples, and some loops. So let's look at a few of the FAQs. Okay. So just to clear a generic doubt about indexing, so when the question says get the first element of the list, for example, if the list is 6, 7, and 8, then the first element is indeed 6, and how you'd get 6 is by doing list of 0, whatever the name of the list is, and of 0. That's how you get the first element of the list. And then some of you have asked, is this thing the same as doing this? It's not. So this is assigning a certain value to a variable, and this is checking if the type of the variable is an integer. All right. Okay. A good thing to notice, if you have to, how do I check 2 or more conditions together? So using and, you can use the keyword and to check 2 or more conditions together. How do I append elements to the list? If you want to append element, you can use the name of the list, dot append, and whatever element you want to append to the list. I'm struggling to understand how to print the results of comparison and then store the result in is even. This is one of the questions of, I don't know, either the assignment of the coding lab. So for this one, you can just hard code true or false in the variable names. Now, this is a question which I think many of you are facing, where on Data Hub, when you run a loop, it just shows you this and does not do anything at all. So now this happens maybe because you have an infinite loop. So make sure wherever you are writing certain loops, make sure you do not have an infinite loop. That's when you would see this. So be aware of that. And that's it. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions, you can just text personally or on the group. And then Paul, you can take over now.
All right. Let me just share my screen. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, guys. So this is gonna be one of the probably like one of the longest demo, but I'll try to see if I can abbreviate some of these. But mainly doing loops and lists. These are technically one of the main like objects or structures of coding that you guys are gonna be introduced to. And you guys have already heard about it in the main lecture, and now that you're doing it in the coding lab, in the assignments, I hope that you guys will get more practice towards it. To to reflect on it, I think I would say this is probably one of the hurdles that I even face. So more practice is needed. If you guys have any questions, just please let us know. But today we're gonna start out with collections, and then with while loops, and then for loops. Just to talk about it. So collections in Python is mainly how we define lists, matrices, whatever set of like strings and numbers. And in Python, they're structured in a way where there's 4 of them. You probably have heard of only 3 of them in the lecture, but the main ones are, so the first one here is lists, and a list is a collection of objects. And how we define these, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk about it first, and then I'm going to show you some examples. So how we define lists is with brackets, and what you put inside is any data type. And wait, let me see. Also, the coding lab is due today before midnight. So if you guys are doing your lab, you could continue doing it. I'm just going to talk about specific and general examples that will help you with your lab as well as your assignments. So, anyways, what you put inside the brackets are any type, data type. It could be a string, it could be an integer or float, or a non-type or a boolean. And so, just to compare these, so the first one, a list can be modified, or it can also have duplicate objects inside, and it can be indexed. And it can also, when you put data types or objects inside the list, they retain their the order that you actually define them. And just to talk about how they're applied, a list is probably one of the most versatile collections, but it's not as efficient. So it's used best if you're editing a collection. And then you guys have also heard of tuples. Yeah, it's due tonight at 11:59. So tuples are a collection of objects, same as a list, but the main difference here is how you define them. So a list, as I said, was defined using two brackets, right, square brackets, but a tuple is defined with parentheses. And just to talk about the difference between the two is, so a tuple it cannot be modified, probably one of the limitations. Same with the list, it can also have duplicate objects, same string, same numbers. It can be indexed, and at the same time, it retains the sorting that you put in it. So it does, in a way, it doesn't sort it. And why would you use a tuple over a list? Well, it's very much efficient, because the way the the way that it's the memory that it's stored in the list is, it retains less memory. So that's why if that's important for you, you would use a tuple. But if you have to edit the list, you would use a list. And the other two, the less common ones, I think you've talked about dictionaries, but the third one is sets. And sets is just a collection again, and but the way you define it is with curly brackets. And this is different from the other two by these. So it can be modified. It can't have duplicate objects. It can't be indexed. And probably one thing is, so the other two, the list and a tuple, it retains the order, but a set doesn't retain the order. It actually sorts the sequence that you put inside the collection of within a set. And why you would use a set is, well, it's used best if you're editing, and at the same time if you want more efficiency, because it retains less memory. So it technically combines these two, but lists are still used most of the time. And then the other one is quite different. It's a dictionary. So a dictionary is same as a set, because it's defined with curly braces. It can be modified as well. It can't have duplicate objects. It can be indexed, and similarly to sets, it doesn't it doesn't retain the order, so it's sorted. So you've heard this, I think it was today, but the way you define a dictionary is you have to have a key and a value. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's quite different from a list, a tuple, and a set. Anyways, so just talk about how you define these. So the method of how you put collection or how you index a collection is, this is different in some languages, but for Python, you index the first or the beginning of a list or with 0, not 1. So that's one thing to remember. And the code syntax, I kind of briefly talked about it. So for a list, you have the square brackets, but at the same time, within each of the collection, you separate them with a comma. So now let's talk about the examples. So okay, so how do you define a list? So defining a list, I guess there's two ways to define it. The first way is what I just said, is so you have a variable and then you have your list of any data type. So we'll start out with just integers here. So just to know if it is actually a list. So you define this and then you ask what type is this variable, and what you have is it is in fact a list. Another way, or here, let me just show you what it outputs. And so it outputs that. And another way that you can actually define it, which I think is a double step. I don't suggest doing it this way, but you have the list command, and then you put the same bracket of numbers that you just defined inside this argument of the list, and you'll see that it's exactly the same. And some of these, yeah, as I said, you can define an integer. I mean, and then you can also define a float. And I mean, you guys already know some of the data types. So besides just having the same data type in each of the elements within a list, you can pretty much make them all different. So here's an example of one where you have multiple data types or objects inside the list. All right. So now, what about tuples? So as I said, a tuple is just a collection, but in this way, you define it with parentheses. Same example, the only difference here is we use parentheses. So let's check if this is actually a tuple. So here you go. This is a tuple indeed. And then let's just see what it outputs. And you'll see that, yeah.
Hey, Paul?
Yeah.
Going to a breakout room now?
Yeah, you can. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll still keep talking. So anyways, for the tuple, if you guys have any questions, just let me know in the chat. Okay. So for the tuple, as I just talked about a list, you can define it using either a command called tuple or the ordinary way where you just define it with parentheses, which is, I don't know why you would do it this way, but anyways, you do that. And in the same fashion, you can define different data type objects inside. So here you go. All right, so now let's talk about dictionaries. So dictionaries is another type of collection. And then I was talking about earlier is, so you have, in a list and a tuple, you only had the comma, but the syntax for a dictionary is quite different. The one thing I can say is when you have to define this, you have to remember two things. There's a colon here, and then what goes on both sides of the colon. So the colon, on the left side of the colon, what you see here, is what we call the key. And on the right side of the colon is what we call a value. So if there's an assignment on this, there's a question, if you have to define it, pay attention to what you have to assign as a key and what you have to assign as a value. All right. Okay, so the next one, the next couple ones, I'm just gonna give a few commands that will work with a list. This will be very helpful later on. I think it's in your assignment, but where you have to, and the main point of a list is you define a set of data types and then you have to modify them. So At the end of this, you'll see that it's very helpful in setting things up and grouping things and then manipulating them inside another list. We'll talk about it in a little bit. So one command that you can use with a list is finding how many elements you have. Each one of these, how many items you have inside. What the way I would do that is to use a length command, and you probably have seen this. So what we have here is a group of fruits, and then we want to know how long is this list? What's the length of it? So if I do this, what ends up happening is you get 6. So you get an integer. So what this helps us to do is later on you're going to use this length as a condition within a loop. More on that later. But it's always good to know what you can put inside a length function and then what it outputs. And then the next one here is a couple ways of how you can access different items or elements within a list. So one of those is an element. So an element is, so after defining that list, and then you wanna, for example, get apple by itself, orange by itself. So what you could do is you take that variable you just defined, and this is the syntax here is the key, because knowing the basics of what you can do, it's gonna help you later on when it gets complicated. So you take the variable, and then with square brackets, you put a number, an integer inside. So like I said, it starts with the first element starts with 0. So this will access apple because it's the first element. And then if you want to access like maybe the second, third, so there's the third element. You put in, so another thing a lot of people are asking about this is, so since you start out with 0 and not 1, so when you're saying third element, it's always -1. So third element, you have to put in 2 there. So that's why. And then if maybe you want to ask, what about the last element? That is, it's very specific. You have to put in -1. So if you want to access the last element, you put -1. So that's this. And then one thing to remember, and that's why you probably defined length first, is the length tells you how long this list is, right? So if you put in a number here that's over the length of your list, like 10 here, for example, you're gonna get an error. So that's why that's one application, I guess, to why you would have to know the length of a list. All right, so that's one way to access these items. The next way is slicing. So slicing a list is a way for you to not only index it using numbers, but what if you wanted to access multiple items within a list, maybe 2 or 3? So here's a way you could do it. So the same fashion, you have the variable, and then you have these brackets, and then within the brackets, you put in a range. And how do you define, hold on, let me see. The first half of a list, okay. Good question. I'll just talk about it. I don't want to put in a few things there, it might mess up the code, but when you want to define the print out the first half of a list, well, you could do it in multiple ways. What I would do is, if you have the length, then you could probably just go from the first to half the length. Or you can do it like, for example, for this, if you want to print out apple to mango, you could go 0 to the 4th one though. So it's 0 to 4. Let's just see if it works there. Or so the 4th would be the 3rd, right? So 4 minus 1 is 3. So it's 0 to 4. So you have to remember that one. So that will be half this list. Okay. Okay. So for that, Bridget, how you would print out a list in a reverse order, I am gonna cover that. I'll just tell you about it. A way that you could do it is here. I'll show you here. One way you could do it is this way. So if you put in 2 colons and then a -1,
Okay.
go ahead.
Oh, so the first colon would be saying that like we would the output would be any number before the -1.
Yeah. So when you see these double colons,
Mhm.
what it's doing is you're doing the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the -1 is you're switching it. This way, that's why I don't like doing it this way. Is because it's kind of it's not as clear. There is a function though. This is what we suggest. I seen this question in Piazza. Like, this is what we suggest you do though. But
Okay.
the clearer way is if you put in reverse. I don't know if I here, let me just see if I could do that. I don't know if I can do this. Yeah, I can do it. I'll tell you later on. There's another way, but the main way is just doing 2 colons and a -1.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so another way that you could slice a list is if you did like if you wanted to return every item between the second, maybe from one to another, right? So from the second to the last element, you would just put in that index of where that item is. So for example, here it's going to be orange, which is the second element, and then this colon tells you go from that all the way to the end. So that's what it does. So every time you see this colon, it's always there to the end. It's just a shortcut. It's easier to, so that you don't have to remember what the length of your list is. And then here's another one. This will give you the third item between third to the last element. So let's just see, and I'll explain it. So this one will tell you every third item. There was actually a question, I just saw this, like, how do you access every second item or every third or whatever item? There's multiple ways, but this is one way. So 2 here tells you 0, 1, 2, right? That's the third item. And then the 2 colons here tells you within all this list. And then the third tells you every third item. Yeah. Let me see. Do you not need the stop option like 10 in? Okay. So Emma, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So on the lab that I was doing it that way, and it was only bringing up like, I don't know, one output. Then I did the way you just showed, which is like the 2 colons, and it worked. But I don't know, professor taught us like,
Okay.
yeah. So how come?
I guess wait, what was the main thing what's your main objective? I guess what did you want to know?
When do you use the start, step, stop versus the 2 colons?
Okay. Well, if you want to do the 2 colons, what it does is it's just a shortcut. You would apply that if you don't care so much about or not know what your last like index number is. In this case, you're saying 1, 2, and then 10, and then there's an interval, right? This interval is like you're going from 1 to 10, and then every 2. So if you know your intervals, it's better to do it that way. If you don't know your intervals, for example, like what we're working with here are like very small lists. You would just use the hard values instead of like the 2 colons. You would only use the 2 colons if it's a really large list. It's less clear, but if you put in the values, the actual values of the list or the index, then it's more clear. But at the same time, what if it's larger than 100? Then it's going to be difficult. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's why I'm kind of tripped up about why on my code when I'm doing the stop option, it's only bringing up let's say, true.
Okay. Oh yeah, another thing to note is when you're doing the stop option, it doesn't recognize. If you want, I'll look at your code in a break room, but the stop option doesn't include that actual number. You have to go one number over that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I did that, and it's still not working.
Really? Okay. Yeah, let me do a breakout room, but let me just go over this
Yeah,
real
sure.
quick. Okay, I remember. All right, so that's one way. Let's just go over appending. This was another question. So when you're appending a list, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to return an updated list with a new object or data type that you're gonna add at the end. Remember, appending doesn't know where you're gonna add it. It adds an object or a new data type at the end of your list. So same list here, and then I want to add strawberry. That's one thing I want to do. So what you could do here is you have that variable that you just defined, and then you just put in dot append, and then the argument of that will be what you're gonna add. So you're gonna add strawberry here at the end. So that's what ends up happening. So it's the variable dot append, and then what goes inside the parentheses is what you're gonna add to the list. And then you could also do memberships. This just checks if a certain data type is inside your list. So here, same exact list, and I want to check if cherry is one of the fruits. So you've already learned how to define a membership operator. So let's check if cherry is inside this. And obviously it's not. You can play around with this. Maybe you can append cherry and then check if cherry is indeed inside. And then another way is indexing is kind of similar to elementing, but as you saw, when we're trying to element or slice something, we were using numbers. What we want to know is what is that number, knowing if a particular like string or data type is inside that list. So how you would do that is you have the variable and then dot index, and then you put in what index is banana in. All right, Michelle. I'll also do a breakout room for you, or let me see if Ashley can do that. But yeah, I'll do it after this. Okay. All right. So as I was saying, so when you're doing dot index and then and you want to check what number or index is banana in, you just do this, and then let's see if it's right. 0, 1, 2, 3. So it is third. That's correct. And then what about replacing? What if now you want to ask, can I replace an item within a list? So one way you could do that is what we just learned is from the indexing, you just define you just define another fruit or another object that you want to replace that with. So remember when we did this indexing, so this list variable and it's a third, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3. This is the banana object within this variable. And what this is going to do is take this banana and replace it with strawberry. So that's one way you could do that. And then you could also sort your list. So what you could do here is, if it's a numbered list, it can be a numeric. What sort does is it alphabetizes a string or numerically arrange it in a way where it's ascending. And so, for example, let's look at the same list and let's sort it. So it sorts it according to alphabetizing, the typical rule. And then what if it's a numbered list? So if it's a numbered list, it will sort it from negative to positive and then in ascending order. All right. And then, so this question came up. I'm gonna talk about, so this is how you define it. So a way that you could reverse the order, so descending order instead of ascending, a list is to use sort, the thing that we just learned, and then use reverse right after. So once you sort it, it will sort it as you guys just found out. But then you want to reverse that. So instead of ascending, it'll be descending. So a way you could do that is just that list that you just updated, the sorted list, you want to put in list var dot reverse. So here, I'll just show you what it does first. So the sort does this. And then when you put in reverse, dot reverse, and then nothing goes inside the parentheses for both of these. It just reverses the order. This is very similar to what you guys found out, right? With if you're just gonna slice it and use these double colons and -1. Hold on. So this was the list, and then oh yeah, I forgot. So this was the list, but then what you have to do is here you go. So if you do this whole thing, and then you sort it, and then you slice it. I don't know if that makes sense. So you sort it first, and then you slice it, and this should give you a descending order. Maybe it makes more sense if you're doing it with numbers. So first thing is you sort it, and then you reverse the order using 2 colons and -1. And then another way is you sort it and then dot reverse, which is the same way. So these are 2 ways of reversing your list. Dot reverse and then colon -1. All right, so let's talk about inserting. So here, what you could do is it's gonna give you an updated list, and what it does is it's a way of appending, but then you're not appending at the end of your list. You're appending at a certain index. So before we talked about adding strawberry inside this list. But now what I want to do is I don't want to add strawberry at the end. I want to add strawberry somewhere in between. So here's a way you could do that. So you have this list and then dot insert, and then it takes 2 arguments. So the first argument here is where you're going to add it. So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? But here it's not replacing it. You're adding it right after mango, because 0, 1, 2, and then 3. So it's between here. So once you add it, it's going to shift everything else. So as you can see, it comes after mango and then and in between mango and banana. So where number 3 index is. And then there's a couple more. Another way is you can actually extend, or what this means is you can combine 2 lists. So maybe you have like a list of fruits, and then maybe another one is a list of different meats, and you want to combine these 2. So one way you could do it is using extend. In the same fashion you do. It's kind of similar but different at the same time. So what you have to do is you have the first list that you define, and then dot extend, and inside this you need to put in the second thing that you're going to add. So in actuality, what you're doing here is you're taking the second list and adding it to the first list. So that's what happens. You're adding this second list to the first list by doing this. Technically, you could reverse it, and this comes in the first, and then this comes after. And then these couple ones are removing. How do you remove something from a list? So one way you could do that is, let's see, you could remove from knowing indexing. You know how to index something now. You can apply the same case if you want to remove that item instead of adding it or referencing it. So what you can do is you have this list that pop, and then this number that goes inside is what you're trying to remove. So here you're trying to remove the 4th element or the 3rd index. So it's going to remove, so this is your list, and it's going to remove whatever's in the 3rd. I believe it's banana, so it took that out. And then another way is you can actually maybe not, you don't want to remember the index number because it does get confusing sometimes. You just want to remove banana entirely. So you just put in this, instead of using pop, you could do dot remove. So dot remove, and then whatever you want to remove, banana, it takes it out. And then you could also do deleting. Deleting, when's up this is very similar to this pop, but the syntax is different. So what you do here is you do del, the keyword, and then you have the variable, and then from the variable you're going to index the fourth element, index number 3.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Just an announcement. So I'm getting a lot of requests for breakout rooms, so I'm getting to you one by one. So just be patient, all of you, right?
Oh yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Carry on.
All right. Oh yeah, Shisha, there's I think Emma and Michelle need breakout rooms.
Yeah. I'm taking them one by one.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, so for clearing is another way that you can update an empty list. So returns updated empty list. So what this does is it'll clear everything from your list and you create an empty list. So for example, you have this list filled with fruits and then you want to clear it out. So in the same fashion that we're defining these, because you have a variable and dot clear, and it doesn't take any arguments inside the parentheses. So you do that, and then there you go. It's gone. Everything's gone. It's an empty list. Later on, I'll talk about how you can add into the list using a loop. And then let's skip that. So now let's talk about the loops. So there's two types of loops. There's a while loop and a for loop. And I think the theory, you've already talked about this in class. I'll just kind of skip this portion and go to the examples. So this first example, this will show how you can repeat different numbers, like using a list, using a while loop. And how you typically define a while loop is, so you have this counter, and this counter is what you begin with in the beginning. And then this will repeat the while loop depending on your condition. And in this condition, if you get true from your condition, then it'll repeat the while loop until it's false. So what this does is you have 1 initially, and then 1 is less than 5. And then it will do the print, and then it'll add to the count. So it's going to be 2 until you get to 5, which equals 5, and then it'll stop doing the loop. So that's why you get 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 5. This next one here, for example, what if you wanted to do a descending order of numbers? Similar example, but now let's do it in a descending order. So let's start out with the last number. So this counter is your initial number 5. And then always remember to change these conditions. So in the first one where you did the ascending order, it was less than equal to. Here it's greater than equal to. So those are the only two different differences. And then also change instead of plussing, you're minusing from your counter. So you started with 5, it goes inside, it's greater than 1, it prints 5, you minus 1, and now it's 4, it comes back. It's still true until you get to 1, it minuses 1, it's 0. Once it's 0, this is false, so it stops at 1. And then another way is, what if you wanted to add a range of numbers? I think this is gonna be in a homework assignment, where you add a range of numbers from, let's say, 1 to 10. So how you could do that is, the sum result is what we're going to print in the end. So we initialize that first. It's like a counter. So you initialize it as 0 in this case. And then you want to define your range. The one thing is, in a while loop, you typically have to define these. In a for loop, you could use range, which I'll cover in a bit. But here, your initial number is 1, and then your final number is 10. And then what you want to do is you want to add all the numbers from 1 to 10 consecutively. So what you do first is you compare the first number to your final number, and then you're going to modify the sum result that you initialize, like a counter. So the first one, which is 0, you're going to add in this initial number, which is going to change. So this initial number was 1, so 0 plus 1. Now it changes your sum result to 1, and then you're also changing the initial number. So the initial number plus 1, it's going to become 2. And then from this, you wanna print out some results. So that's how this runs. And then just to explain if it actually works. So the first time was 0, and you added 1, so it's 1 here. And then you added 2, it's 3. And then you added 3, it's 6, and you added 4, up to 10. So this is a way that you could do that. The way you really define these is quite tough, but I would just debug like what each result is doing, and then if you're getting that right result, that's good. And then if not, then just see how you can modify some of these operators. And then so now the next one is, how do you do a loop with a continue and a conditional? So how you do that is, and I guess just to recall, continue, what it does is, for example, we ran a while loop across a range, and you wanted to skip a number. Oh, well, the demo is just for us. You could email me though. I can send you the demo if you want. I think it may be helpful, yeah. And okay. So anyways, so when you have continue, what ends up happening is this typically goes hand in hand with using it with a conditional. So what continue does is it skips the number that you define within a condition of a if statement. So in this case, you have this as if, and then your counter is equal to 2. So you're decreasing this 10 by 2. And then when you reach a number that's 2, you're going to skip it. That's what continue does. So you went from 10, and so it'll only be 8, 6, 4, and then you went to 2. And since it's 2, it's going to skip it and not print, and then it'll go to 0, and then it'll print. So what it's doing is it's skipping that value, whatever you inputted here as a condition. And then here's another one, but now we're going to be using break. It's the same exact one, but as you can see, how it's compared to continue is continue skips it and still continues to the, decreasing the number. But with break, what ends up happening is once you reach that, once you meet this condition within your break condition, if condition, it doesn't continue anymore. So it's 8, 6, 4. Since we have 2, it'll break and not print 0. And then you could also do like a break condition with a Boolean condition in the while condition. What this does is it just tells you run this when this is true. So typically I like defining these as conditions, but you could also do it as a Boolean. And let me see, the next one is okay, so you know how you guys learned if-else statements? In this way, you could also do while else. I know it's a little weird, but you can do while else, but this else is everything. It's kind of just, it works similarly as an if-else, but it's everything but, once you reach the ending of your while loop, it'll do that, whatever is in else. So here in this case, you have 3, you're reducing it by 1 every time you're running this loop. So 3, 2, and then 1. And then instead of not doing anything, you go to else and it prints whatever, or it does whatever code you have here. And then I guess yeah, okay. This is kind of applying what we just talked about. So you have from 0 and then you're going all the way to 5, and you're adding 1 to it. And then, so it'll print these. You can use both numbers and strings together and iterate through the loop. And then at the end, once you reach 4, you're not meeting this anymore, right? So once you reach 5 here, it'll print out another string, not this. So that's what it does. Since this is not true anymore, it'll print this. So kind of similarly, so if else, if it'll run if you meet the condition, but then if it's false, it runs else. Here, if while is true, it'll keep on running until it's false, then it'll run else. And then I guess you're gonna see this a lot, but in your homework. But when you're doing membership operators with a list, a combination of membership operators, a list, and a while loop. So here, okay, that's good. Thank you. So for a list and a while loop, so you define this list. In this case, we're gonna have pets now, and what we want to do here is I want to remove something from this list. And so how you can do that is, what is that something that you want to remove? So cat is something that I want to remove from this list. And then so what ends up happening is this checks if cat is inside a list. And there's 2 of these. So the first one is gonna be true. It's gonna run the while loop. And then one way you can remove, we talked about this, is removing the actual string from this list is dot remove, and then put in cat inside, and then it'll remove each one separately. So the first time it runs, all right, Bridget, yeah, if you don't finish, but please turn it in or finish today by midnight though.
Okay.
Okay, so so when you remove cat, it'll remove it one by one. So it runs this. As you can see, first one, it removes 1 cat, and then the second one, it removes the second cat. All right, so this next one is, how do you empty a list? So you have the same exact list, and then now here there's no condition. What I want to do is I'm just gonna run this while loop until it empties. So that's why we don't have a condition here, because I wanna, this just says, all right, do you have a list? So once you have a list, which we do, run this while loop. And then, so what this is doing here is removing by indexing. So pop, and then what you're trying to do here is removing every last one. So the first one, the last element is cat. So it'll remove that, the next one, rabbit, and so on and so forth until it empties the list. It's always good to do it this way. One thing I want to remind you is always align your print or whatever your command statements are inside your loops. Because for example, this way I aligned it with this guy after removing it. So that's why it's a good way to debug what's happening with every step. I could have done this where it just shows me the last result. I always like doing it this way, seeing what happens with every step. So that's what you have to do. You have to align it to where you want to actually print something out. Let's not go over that one. Let's not go over that one. Okay, so now for for loops, yeah, the theory, we talked about this in class. I'm just gonna go over the examples. So the first one here is, so you print a number, you've learned this in class, so you have the counter similarly, and then within a range, so if you put in 1 number here, it'll just tell you this is your stop. So it'll tell you from 0 to 5, but not including 5. So 0 to 4. Remember, this single number here is not included, it's your stop. So it'll print this from 0 to 4, and another one, just to explain how for loops and ranges work. So if you put in 2 numbers here, this tells you the start and stop. So this defines, instead of starting from 0, you go from 2 to 5 here. Hold up. Oh, shoot. All right, okay, so from 2 to 5. So every time you define a range, the start number is always included, and then the stop number is not, so 2 to 5. And then if you want to define like the third argument, so now you have a start, which is the 2, a stop, which is the 11, and then you have a step or interval. So what this does is, so it'll go from 2 to 10, but then in intervals of 2 instead of 1. The default is 1. And then ranges can only take in integers and not floats. And then you could also do like this, and then this is just going the other way. So the reverse of doing what I just said is, so you go from 10 to 0. So 10 is included, stop isn't, and then you're minusing 2, which is your interval. Let's not do that one. Oh yeah, and then you could also do like repeating the strings or whatever command you have inside. And that's how you can just go like from each count 1 to 5, print hello 5 times. This is what it's doing. All right. Oh yeah. One thing I didn't cover earlier is, so when you define a list using range, that you could do. So how you do that is, so you just have the list command, and then within the range from 1 to 10 is the argument you put inside. Instead of doing like 1, 2 all the way to 10, you could just do it this way for numbers, integers. And then there is another, let me see. Okay, we'll cover this, and then something that you'll see in your assignments. So you could use for loops, ranges, and conditionals all together. So you have this range, and what you want to do, and this range is from 10 to 100 in increments of 10. And then what you want to do here is you want to print out a combination of strings and integers. And then whatever it, like as you march on to your range of numbers and you're meeting certain conditions, it'll print out different strings for each. So you've learned if, else, if, and else statements before, and this just builds on it. So all that you can put inside a for loop. And then the only difference here is now I want to put in different, like a range of values instead of just checking one value or one line. Okay, so this is something that you're going to see. I'll relatively go over this quickly. So for a for loop, and you want to do some, like you want to add a range of numbers. We do this similarly with while loops, but in this way, we're going to use a range instead of defining the start and stop value. So initially you have this as 0, and then now you wanna add numbers from 11 to 29. Okay, so from 11 to 29, what you can do is, so from this initial value, you're gonna add in what this is doing, just to explain. So for each range, you're going from 11 to 29, you're gonna plug that into count, and then count is gonna take in each individual value, and then you're gonna add that to your result, some result, with each time you're running this, and then this is gonna print each individual one. So this is what it's doing. So every time you have a count in range, you have the value in each of these, and then you're putting it in count, and then some result is gonna add those individual values like subsequently. So if you have like 12 and then 13, or yeah, and then so this is what it's doing. And then let me just talk about, let's see. Okay. So this one is a, let me see. How do you do a nested while loop? Is it similar to a nested conditional? Yeah, it is similar. You just have to be careful. You could put in as many as you have, like double while loop or triple while loop or for loop. You do it similarly as a conditional. Okay, so if you want to do like an integer list and then perform mathematical like plus minus to it, this is how you do it. So you have a list of numbers, and then for this, you're pretty much you take each one of these and you're adding 10. So for each one of these, you just count plus 10, and then that's how you do it. And then here's one that you're gonna see for sure. What about a for loop that multiplies through a list? So how you could do that is, so you define one list first. This is your initial like range. So this first one is showing us 1 to 10. And then you want to add, or you want to append these values that's going to be modified from list 1 to list 2. So you start off list 2 as an empty list. And then these two lists are going to be, the list 1 is going to be modified and it's going to go to list 2 with each individual number. So let's go on with the for loop. So you have this list var, which is 1, puts it, each one of these is going to put it in count. And then for each one of these, you're going to times it by 2. And then, so that's all it's doing. You're timesing it by 2. But how do you put it inside list 2? You do that by doing list2 dot append. And then whatever you're appending is each one of these times 2. And then this is what you do. And then, so that's just to show you what's happening. So the first one is 2, and then 4, 6, 8, all the way to 10. So 10 times 2 is 20. And what about a loop that, what if you do the same thing, but now I want to only put in numbers that are divisible by 2 or even? You have this set of values, and then you start off again with a second list with an empty list. And then you put in a conditional now. So this conditional tells you for each individual count that you within list 1, let's check if you divide it by 2, you get 0. So that's divisible by 2 or even. If this is true, then that's the only time you take that number and you put it inside the second list. Very similar, only difference is you put in a conditional. This conditional just checks if it's divisible by 2. And now what if it's positive and negative? You can probably think of it similarly to what I just said. This time though, if you're gonna do both positive and negative, you need 2 new lists. So you define 2 new lists are empty, and you do an if and else. So it takes each one of these elements, puts it in count. Each increment of count is going to be checked if it's positive or negative. This if statement, if it's greater than 0, it's positive. So you just append it to the second list. This else is everything else that's less than 0. And you put that in the second list. All right, I think this last one is very simple. This is just more list manipulation. So what if you had a list of numbers and you want to print it reverse of this? So using a for loop. So you take this list, you reverse it, as we talked about, two colons and a negative, and then you print it. And I think that's it. Let me try to do a breakout room. Okay, Emma. Yeah, I can share it to you. Just email me after.
Would you mind posting your email, please?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Here you go, guys. Oh yeah, Shisha, so did you get to them?
Yes, I did. Most of them.
Good, okay. Yeah, for the demo, just email me, guys. I can send it to you.
People leave.
Do you want to take one of them?
Yes, I am taking, but the person's not there anymore, I think. Michelle, are you there? They're the last one who told me to get a breakout, but then I think they left. So anyway.
Yeah, I think she she might just email us for the demo.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll stop. Hang on, I'll do you in a bit. Did you have any specific question? Maybe I can just ask, you can ask here. Okay, since it's already 5, let me just start. Hey guys, if you guys are not from the other group, this is the third lab. Welcome. I'm just gonna talk about a few tips and tricks about loops as well as lists. Mainly, these are very important to your coding language repertoire. One of the things that I can say is this is where I actually struggled most. So the one thing that will solve that is just to be exposed to it as much as you can. You're going to be seeing loops for pretty much forever in codes. So I don't think I have access to the FAQs, so I'm just going to start with the demo. So let's see. All right, so let me share my screen here. All right, so this demo is going to be quite long. I'll try to abbreviate some things. If we don't finish, you guys can definitely email me or Ashlisha. We can give you the demo PDF, I think, or the notebook. Just email us and I can send it to you. Oh, Emma, yeah, I'll send it to you after this, maybe at 6, because I don't know who's from the other group. Okay, all right. All right then. So what I'm going to talk about are, you've already heard this in class, the theory, some examples. Is just going to be on top of that are collections and while loops and for loops. And Ashisha can probably talk about other things later on. I feel like this, the lecture for this week is quite expanded. So we're trying to break it down. So I'll do this part and then Ashisha can do ciphers and maybe encodings. But so I'll talk about collections first. So what are collections? Collections are, in how you would define it, is just a set of data types. And in Python, there's typically 4 of them. You've seen 3, but in total, there's 4. And what they are lists, tuples, sets, and dictionaries. And they have, and some of them have good advantages, others are used in other ways. And I'll just define when you could do that. So a list is a collection of objects, and how you define these is using a bracket, a square bracket. And one of the good things about a list is it's very flexible. and that's why we're going to cover it most here. And what I'm going to cover here is going to be applied equally to tuples, sets, and dictionaries. So for a list, you can modify it. You can also have duplicate strings and numbers in it. You can index it, and then when I mean unsorted, that means whatever the way that I inputted the values within the list, it's not going to change it compared to it being sorted. And it's used best if you're trying to edit the collection. And a tuple, very similar to a list. The only couple of differences is one is you define it in using parentheses, and you can't modify it. It retains the info, and you can have duplicates. You can index it, and then at the same time, it retains the order that you defined it. Why you would use a tuple is it retains less memory, so it's faster if you're gonna do like multiple coding. It's faster to define a tuple that doesn't change, can't be modified, than a list that can be modified. And a set, something you haven't seen, but it's very similar to a list, is but then the way that it's defined is using curly braces. It can also be modified. It can't have duplicates, and it can't be indexed. But here now, how you're defining the elements within the list is it's sorted. So every time you put something in it, it's going to be sorted. And then why you would use it is it's editable, it's modifiable, or mutable. You've heard that word before. So if it can be editable, and then at the same time it retains less memory. So it's kind of like a combination between these two. And a dictionary, how you define this is very similar to a set, curly braces. It can be modified, can't be duplicated, can be indexed, and it's also sorted. Okay. Okay. So Kathy, so sorted and unsorted. These are just my definition. In literature, they call it ordered and unordered. So unsorted is the same as unordered, and then ordered is the same as sorted. So the way I'm saying is unsorted is, so when you're defining 1, 2, 3, or like 3, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, and then it's unsorted, that means that it's not gonna sort it when you define it. It's gonna retain that order. But if you're defining it as a set, it'll automatically sort it as 1, 2, 3. Okay. And then let's just skip over this and then talk about the examples. So how you define a list is two ways. Let's see, you have 1, 2, 3, and you want to put that inside a list. So you have this variable, and then these are square brackets, and you put it inside, and then you want to check if this is actually a list. So let's go by putting that variable inside type, and then that gives you a list. And then now you want to check what it outputs, print, and then so it gives you 1, 2, 3. Another way that you can define it is less common, is using the keyword lists and then put the exact thing that you just defined inside the argument. So that's one. Let's see. Good question. That way it's probably going to be, sorry, I didn't actually do that, but like, because I'm not going to cover the sorted sets and dictionaries here. It may sort it in separately, like numbers with numbers and then strings by alphabetize. All right. So in the same way that you've learned data types, whatever you put inside lists is it can be any of those data types. It could be a string, it could be a float, and then just to show you a combination. So here's a combination of everything, all the ones that you've learned. So you could do that with a tuple. So how you define it, a similar example, but then the only difference is you have these parentheses. So let's see if it's actually a tuple. Hello? Oh.
Hey, Paul, hi. Did we start the other session now?
Yeah, I just started, but I did tell them that you're gonna do a breakout room.
Yeah, I am. So I'm continuously doing it. So if you guys have requests, you can just put up your names on the chat and then I'll get to you one by one, okay?
All right, cool. And so with a tuple, similarly, you put that variable you just defined and check if it's a tuple, and it says tuple, so it is. And so when you want to print it out, you put inside print. Let me see. Okay. So when you wanna define a tuple, it's kind of similar to a list. Two ways. What you could do is using the symbols and then using this keyword tuple, and then there you go. And then so in the same fashion, it takes in different data types. All right. So here's how you define a dictionary, just to call out what goes inside. So remember that you have these braces, and then what goes inside here is two things. There's one question about this, where what are these two things? So you have a colon here, and on the left of the colon is a key. We call that a key. This can be anything though, but it's just a string here. So on the left of it is the key, and then on the right of the colon is the value. Okay. So there's going to be a question on defining it, but then we're going to be using key and value, and then you have to define the actual list. So that's just what you have to remember. What is a key and what is a value? And then different ways you can modify lists, and commands that you can use within a list is, what if you want to define its length? So you have this list, right? And then you want to find how many items. Finding the length is the same way as how many items is inside a list. So how you do that is you put len, and then inside the argument, or the arguments inside this parentheses, is what is your variable or your list. So let's just count it. By observation, you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the length of this is going to be 6. And then now let's talk about elementing. When you want to element or index a list, you want to remember what are the different numbers that's associated with each element. You've learned this already, but just to recall, the first element is not 1. It starts with 0 up to the length of your list. So that's gonna confuse some people. So let me just go over it. So the first one, as I said, the first element is 0. So you're accessing 0 by just elementing. So how you do that is you have the variable and the square brackets, and you put in the element index inside, so 0. Then what if you wanted to do like other things? What about the third element? So here's where it gets confusing. So the third element is mango, but then you don't put 3 here. It's 1 less than what you think it would be, because you started with 0, so it's 2. And then what if you wanted to access like the last element? How you can do that is just putting -1. Another way you could do that is, since we know like this last the length of your list, you could put that same exact command in here, and it'll output the last element. And then one thing to note why you needed to know the length is, later on you could actually modify this using a for loop or a while loop, and then within those there's some conditions that you have to meet, and what you could do is use this length to compare an integer to another one. But here's another case is, so knowing the length, the number of elements here, and you want to access maybe something greater than that, 10, it will give you an index error. So you don't want that. So that's why you need to know the total length. And then now, what about if you want to, instead of doing one element at a time, what if you want to do a range of elements, access that within the list? So what you could do is you can define, this first one is very helpful. There's some questions on this. What if you wanted to reverse the order of the list? So what you could do here is do 2 colons and then a -1. So that's just something you got, that syntax that you just have to know is you do this double colons, which gives you the full range, and then there's -1, which switches it. Later on, I'll talk about a different way, a clearer way of how you can do this. And so another way you can do a slice is, what if you want to access only from a certain index to the last element? Well, you have to know what is the second element index. So that's 1, and then all the way to the end is use this colon. And what about if you want to do like every other or every n element? In this case, we want to do every third element between a certain range. So this third item is going to be mango and melon. This last item here is what you want to put in as your that third item. This first number tells you the range. So from the second to the end, and then take only every third one. So you just have to experiment. It gets clearer the more you input more values here and combinations. But these are a few tips on what you could do. And then there's going to be a question about appending a list. What this means is how this can be applied is, what if you had like an empty list and then you wanted to take different items and you wanted to add to it? That's appending. So in this case, we have the same list and then I want to add another fruit to it. So how you could do that is you do a variable and you dot append, and then this dot append takes in argument, and whatever you put inside these parentheses is what you want to add into the list. One thing to note is when you're using dot append, you're adding it to the end of the list, not anywhere else. There's another way to add into a list where a specific index, I'm going to talk about subsequently. So what you do here is the dot append strawberry, and then it adds it to the end. And then you could also do membership operators. Just checks if a certain string number is inside a list. So you've learned this already. This is an extension to a list. So what if you want to check if there's a cherry inside this list? You just do that and then inside the variable list. And it's false because it's not in it. You can certainly add cherry to your list and then check if this is going to be true. I'll leave that up to you. And then there's indexing. When you're doing elementing, you're wanting to know a certain item inside a list, knowing its index number. When you're indexing, you're wanting to know what is that index number, knowing the string. So it's the reverse. So how you do it is you have this list that you define, dot index, and then within this takes in the argument, and what's inside is what you're interested in. So I want to know what is the index number of banana or whatever here. So you do this, and then you're gonna see, oh, it's 3. So let's check 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's correct. And what if you're replacing something? So like I said, you can do appending. This is another way. So you're gonna replace it. So what I want to do here is I want to put in strawberry in a certain I want to replace an item here with another item that I just defined. So in this case, I want to replace banana with strawberry. So you want to know here, where is banana? So 0, 1, 2, 3. So you're gonna do an elementing or indexing. So you take the variable and then you put in the index number that you want to replace, and then you make that equal something else. So in this case, it's strawberry. So that's what's happening. You're replacing banana with strawberry. And what if you wanted to sort a list? Either alphabetize it or numerically ascending order. One way you could do that is using sort. So in the same fashion, you can define that by doing the list, that sort, and then this doesn't take in anything. It's just going to be the parentheses. So what we have here is this 10 and whatever number inside and -1. It's not sorted, obviously. But what if I wanted to do that? So you just do this, and then I'll sort it. Negative to and then positive, increasing. And then so now you may ask, and we talked about it earlier, is what if I wanted to do this in a different order? So this does, in a sort does is it'll update your list in ascending order. What if I want to do it the reverse, this descending order? What you do is you do the sort first, and then you do dot reverse. So both of those don't take any argument. You just do dot sort, parentheses, and dot reverse. So it sorted it the other way, descending. And another way is, so this is the clearer way of doing it. Another way is, what if you just wanted to use indexing? So you do dot sort, and then you do 2 colons and -1. So it does the same thing. So descending order here. And then what if you want to insert something kind of like appending inside a list? So, but now you wanna actually add it and then still retain the list and then just shift everything around. What you could do is dot insert. So dot insert, and then this takes in 2 arguments. The first thing here is where are you gonna input that new variable or that new object inside this list? So I wanna put in strawberry between mango and banana. So I say 0, 1, 2, and then 3. That's where you want to put it in between here. So it's 0, 1, 2, and then 3. And then so it's 3, and then you put that in, and then you're gonna put it in between. And here's another way. I think this is very helpful. But what if you have 2 lists, and then you want to put both of those together? You want to combine them. So you define them separately first, list 1, list 2, and then you can do this 2 ways. You can add list 2 to list 1 or list 1 to list 2. In this case, I'm going to add list 2 to list 1. So what you can do is you do list 1 dot extend, and then this takes in an argument, which is what you're adding to list 1. So this is going to be this is what your output is. And then what if you want? So these next few ones are going to be, what if you want to remove an item within a list? One way you could do that is using removing by index, and how you do that is you do this list dot pop, and then whatever you want to remove, know what index number it is and put it in here. So I want to remove banana, so that's 0, 1, 2, 3, and then so as you can see, it removed it. Another way you could do that is removing by the actual element name. So this time you don't need to know the index number. All you have to do is you have the list and then dot remove. It takes in this whatever variable that you have here in the element that you want to remove. So you want to remove banana, so just put in the string of banana and then it'll remove that. And then what about deleting? Deleting is another way, very similar to removing by index. It's just a different syntax. So you do del keyword, and then you've learned this one, so do the same thing as how you would access that element, is you do the variable and then put in the index number inside, and it'll delete that. And then what if you want to empty the list? So you have this whole entire list that we've worked with, and I wanted to clear everything out of it. So you just do the variable list dot clear, and then it doesn't take in anything, and then it just empties it. All right, so let's move on to loops now. So for the first one, while loop. A while loop, you've learned this one, but a while loop is just, so it takes in a counter. You initialize a counter, and then it'll run the loop if whatever this condition is, if it's true, it'll run the body of the loop. And if it's false, it'll exit out of the loop. So it'll continue running it until either you break it, which I'll talk about, or if it's false. Once it's false, it'll exit out. And then so one way you could use a loop is, it's kind of similar to a list, but in this way, there's no brackets, there's no symbols. It's just the actual numbers that you're printing out. So what if I wanted to print out 1 to 5? So like I said, you initialize a counter. So I have 1 here, and then I want to print out 1 to 5. So how do I want to define that? So you first define like a condition for your while loop so that it runs. And what you do here, what I'm doing here is, so you're taking this count and you're comparing it to your final number, which is 5. And then you want to iterate from 1 to 5. So it'll run this first, and it's 1, it prints. And then this is the thing, you have to change that counter so that you reach 5. And how you would do that is you just add 1. Count equals count plus 1. And then once you reach 6, it's not going to run anymore, so you just printed 5, which is that. And then another way is the descending order. You just reverse everything, changing your iterative function here, and then your condition, and then also your counter. So you start with 5, and then this is changed, and then now this is minusing instead of adding. The way I usually do this is, what do I want to achieve, and then try to print out every step of the iteration. And if it's not going the way you want it, then change some of these, and then that's how you get the final answer. And then so what if you wanted to add, you're gonna see this in your homework, but what if you want to add a range of numbers? So what you do here is you define, thing is with while loops is you can't define the range and like a range function here. So you have to do it manually in a way where the initial number or start is 1, and then the next number or the final number stop is 10, and then I want to add from 1 to 10 consecutively. So you first define your counter, which is some result in this case, and then what you want to do for your condition is you want to iterate it from 1 to 10, and then compare this value, this final value, to the 1 value that's going to be increasing as you enter the while loop. So the sum, you're going to increase this. You're going to be adding the values from your previous sum to the increasing initial sum. So like I said, it's good to just test some of the operators here, and then once you get the correct answer, then that's good. But this is a way that you would add a range of numbers. Technically, it's 2 counters, one that's adding it and one that you're gonna add to it. And okay, so just to do the difference between these two, continue and break. What continue does is, as I've defined a list of numbers and I want to skip 1, that's what continue does. You can go from, let's say, 10 to 2 and skip when it's 2. So how you would do that is you put continue within a conditional, and then that conditional is what compares what you want to skip. So for example, if the count that's being iterated reaches 2, then it'll skip that and it'll go to the next iteration. How that's different from a break is, once you reach that certain condition, 2 in this case, it won't run anymore. It'll just break out of your loop, and you get only everything before that. And let's see, let's just go over. Oh yeah, in the same fashion you defined if, else, if, and else conditions, or if and else if conditions. You've also done you can also do else for while loops and then for loops. This way, why you would do that is, so if you're running the while loop, you're testing if it's true. You have a condition similar to an if statement. But what if it's false and you wanted to do something else? Then you just put in an else. Oh yeah, one thing I didn't note is make sure you align your commands within your while loops to the conditions, because if it's not aligned, you may get different results or an error. And so that's what you do while else. And so what about, and you can also do not just numbers but with strings. You can combine these. And another thing is, oh yeah, what if you wanted to remove things from a list? Now we've learned how you could do that, like statically by just doing it manually, like from a list. But what if you wanted to iterate it and then remove multiple things? You could use a while loop for that. So here we have a set of or a list of pets, and then I wanted to remove cat from it since there's 2 of them here. So what you would do is, so you have that counter. So this counter is cat, and then you're doing a membership comparison here. So this cat is inside the list that you define. So is it true? Yes. So the first time you do it, there's going to be 2, so it's true. It runs the while loop. And then what we have here is, so you have the list. Hello? Oh. So you have this list, and then we wanted to remove the cat, right? So you have this list dot remove, and then you have the cat inside, and then you just continuously do it. One way, just to show you guys why you want to align and why you don't. If you're not gonna align, so for example, this way, I aligned it to this and not within my condition. You're just gonna get your final answer. So you get your final answer. Well, one of the good ways is you can actually get each iterative answer. So you have to align it here, and you're gonna do that. So for each iterative, as you run your while loop, you're gonna get an answer. And then this next one is, what if you wanted to empty a list? So here's how you would do that. So you have the same exact list, and you put that here with no condition, because you just want them to know if this is still a list. And then, so the first one, you have the list, and then what I want to do here is I want to remove every last element of that list until it's gone, nothing's left. So you do dot pop and then -1, which is every last one, and then this is how it does it. Okay, let's skip that one. So now let's talk about for loops. Very similar, but then the thing with for loops is it's not continuous. It'll run it for a certain amount of iterations, which you will define within a range. And then if that is, if the last item in a sequence is false, then it does it here. And it'll run to every, like for example, with list, it'll run to every sequence, every element. And if it's true, if this is the last item of a list, because you've already ran through it, then it'll exit out of the loop of a for loop. If it's not the last item, I'll keep on iterating and it's false. This is what it's showing. Okay, so some things to note about range and for loops. Very helpful is you can define a set of numbers by just doing a for loop and a range combination. So for here, let's just explain this. So you have this counter, and then this counter is going to take in every value in range. The sequence is going to iterate from, let me just run this first, from 0 to 4. One thing to remember with range is if you're going to define only one value, this will default to just the stop argument. So it's going to be from 0 to 5, not including 5. So between 0 to 5, but not including that value, the stop value. And what if you define 2 arguments? So in this case, I defined 2 and then a 6. What does this mean? So the first value here is going to be where you start. You didn't want to start from 0, and you wanted to stop at 6, but not including 6. So it always includes the first start, but it doesn't include the stop. So it's from 2 to 5. So between 2 to 6, not including 6. And then the third argument, tells you that, okay, I want to go from 2 to 11, but then I don't want to default to incrementing it by 1. I want to go every 2. So what you do is you put this 2, so it's going to be 2 to 11, not including 11, and then every 2. So 2, 4, whatever. And then, so you could do this in many ways, but then you can also do it in in another order. So that was in ascending and then descending, and it just depends on what you're defining as start and stop, and then your step. And okay, so you could do this with strings, you could do this with floats and integers, but what you're doing here is, so I wanna print a string or whatever this command is inside 5 times. Well, and that way, how you could do that is same exact count here within a sequence, and then however many times that runs is however many times you're going to print this, which is 5 times. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah. So I didn't talk about this with when we defined list commands, but when we define numbers or integers in a list, you could do it the brute force way, where you could just enumerate 1 to whatever number, or you could do it with a range. So you have this list, and then you put in this range inside, which we just talked about. It'll do exactly the same thing. The one thing is though, this will only work with integers. So the list that you can define with range is a set of integers. It doesn't take in floats. And let's see. Okay, so with for loops and ranges, another way that you've already learned this, but another way you can combine this with what you know is the conditionals. What if you wanted to put in conditionals within the for loop? And then what you learned was you've used if and else statements to print one thing, one line. But what if you wanted to iterate through multiple lines and then print out like this? So you do the same thing. You just iterate, you define a range, you put that range by increments inside counts. And then so for each count, what this is doing is I'm printing out different statements depending on the number for counts. So that's what you could do. And then, all right. And then here, what if you wanted to do like, I think we did this with while loops, is what if you want to add a range of numbers? So you could certainly do that with a for loop. So what if you want to add a range of numbers from 11 to 29? So you define your counter. This counter is your initial value that you're trying to fill and add numbers to. So you have this, just to go over this specifically, so this range is defined, set of integers, and then you're putting that inside count iteratively. And each one of those is going to be added to the initialized counter that you define already, some result. And then iterating that, you're going to get a new sum result each time. And then this is what it comes out. So if you manually did that, you'll probably see that this is true. But this is a really fast way of doing that. Okay, so similarly, you can do continue and break with for loops as with for while loops. I'll just skip this part, but now I'll talk about, let's see. I'll talk about how you use lists with loops. So what if you had, this is a list that I defined at the beginning, and then I wanted to print out each element inside the list. So what you could do is, so you get that list we defined, and then put each element inside a counter, and then with each element you're running the for loop, you're gonna print one of them or each one of them. So this is how you do it. First time is gonna be apple inside count, count's gonna print. Next one's orange inside count, orange is gonna print, and then whatever. And then this next one is just gonna be is a combination of you can combine strings, and then you can also get a list and add to it in a statement. It's very similar to what we did, but we're just adding different things. And here you're gonna see this a lot on the homeworks. So what if you had a set of integers, and then you wanted to do some mathematical operators to it? You could use for loops for that. So you have this list, and each element within this list, I wanted to add to it. So in this case, I'm adding 10 to each element. So let's iterate within this list by doing this. And then easily you just do for each iterate, and for each count, you add 10. So there's gonna be 2, add 10, it'll be 12, and then 4, add 10, so yeah. And then this, let me see. Okay, I won't define this. Okay, what about this? What if you want to do multiplication through a list? One way you could do that is, so you define this list of numbers, 1 to 10, and then what I want to do is I want to create an empty list. And this empty list is things that that I want to define things that I'm going to compare from list one, and when those things are true, that's what I'm going to put in this next list. So in this case, all I want to do is I want to iterate each one, and then I want to times each element by 2. So what you could do is the same way you put in this list in here in the membership condition comparison, and then I'm going to iterate by putting each one of those in count. So 1 to 10 in count, and then with each count, I'm timesing it by 2. So that's what it does. So 2 times 1 all the way to 10. And then here's another one. What if I wanted to do, what if I wanted to put inside that second list something that's only divisible by 2, or something that's even? So I define this set of numbers, and then an empty list again. And then I'm going to use a for loop. The only difference here is now I don't want to put in every number inside this new list. I want to only put in certain numbers. And those certain numbers are divisible by 2. So how do you do that? You do that with a conditional. So same thing. You have a list, iterate with count with each one, and then so this if else this if statement is going to check a condition that says, okay, I have my count, I'm dividing it by 2, and then I want the remainder to be 0. So count divided by 2, remainder to be 0, and that's the only time, once that's true, is when I'm going to use append. So I'm going to append whenever this is true to the second list. So whatever is count, I'm going to append that into the second list. So that's what you're going to see here. And another thing you can do is, what if I want to do both positive and negative? And as you can see, I've set this up for that. So in this way, you do 2 lists, 2 empty lists. One list for positives and then another list for negatives. So, okay, let's see. The same way here, but now we have 2 conditions. Or in a way, we have 1 condition and then the default condition. So the if statement is going to take in the even number, the positive numbers. So positive greater than 0, and then everything else is going to go on the other list. And then what if I wanted to reverse a list by checking each, you can print each one. And how you can do that is you just reverse that list first. We know how to do this now. And then, so it'll reverse it, it'll increment each one with count, and it'll print that out. And I think that's it. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm gonna do this with I did this with my other class, but if you guys would like to get this demo, just email me. I'll send you my email in chat. And if you guys need any more help, let us know.
For doing the nested loop, so I went to the loop section of lecture.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to follow that structure, but I don't really understand what I'm doing. Like, do I just like come up with my own like I don't really know how to like store the numbers.
Okay. Let me see. Do you wanna show me here? I don't know if I can do a breakout room yet. Do you wanna just share your screen?
Yeah. Share.
Okay.
So like I'm not really great with loops in general, so I just copied what was from one of the lectures.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay.
Looks like I was confused in the lecture too. So,
That's what I usually do. Like it's because like you basically you're not supposed to start off from scratch.
okay.
You could edit what you have before. It's faster that way. But let me see. This is for coding lab, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is for nested loops.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So yes, you can do. Yeah. So this was something actually I was gonna cover, but
Like,
I
how do
did.
you even do this part? Like, I don't get that. I can't even do one.
Okay. So counter equals 1. Yeah, this is one of the tougher ones. So you want to start out with, you can do this with 2 while loops. So you might want to start out with 1 loop first.
Okay, so should I delete all of this?
Yeah. So Gabriel, yeah, for your coding labs, it's only for attempt, but
Okay.
make sure you do attempt like each one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So when I do my while loop, do
Yeah.
I have to, like, how it says keep looping? That's just like a name, right? So I could just name it whatever I want.
Yeah, you can name it whatever you want. Yeah.
Loop. Let's see, or something. And then do I have to do something like loop C is equal to, and then do that for every single like group of integers?
Yeah. So you see how like it's 1 to 7.
Yeah.
So you start out with 1. So that's your first counter. So
Uh-huh.
you initialize it to 1, and then what you want to do is you want to compare that, the first one,
Uh-huh.
like whatever variable you defined, to your final number. So your final number here is 7, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess 8. You could put 8. Whatever way you're gonna compare it.
So I could do like loop, like another name, like loop 2 or whatever, and then do equals 7.
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
And then now, how do you define your condition?
Would I do it right here? Like if blank or whatever, like if loop C is greater than 0.
You could do that. For a while condition, you could define it within the while condition.
Oh, here. So I could do like
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah.
While loop C is greater than 0.
So okay. So you know how you define 2 things, right?
Yeah.
So with a while loop, what you could do here is, so you have the initial number and then the final number,
Mm-hmm.
and then you run it as long as you don't, or as long as this condition is true, right?
Yeah.
Try to define like a comparison where this is true.
So I could do like while loop C
is
is
not is, but like I meant like you know what I mean, like compare them.
And like could I use and or?
You could, but remember this is integers. Like what are we trying to do with integers?
We're just trying to
like what would you use to compare them?
like greater than or less than?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'll do like if loop 1 is less than.
There you go, yeah.
Loop 2. Okay.
It's what was it called? But then you want to print out 7, right?
Yeah.
You could just test it, but like you know how if you want to print out 7, it should be included.
I don't get it.
Okay, so you have like 1 and 7. You're comparing 1 and 7, right now.
Yeah.
So how can you include 7? Yeah. Someone, okay.
Did someone answer? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what this is usually the questions we ask ourselves. Yeah.
Okay. Would I be including? I don't really know. Would I just be including it by saying like equal to, like greater or?
Yes. Yeah. That would be the one. Yeah. Okay. It's the yeah. You could do it that way. The other way. Yeah. There.
Greater.
It's Let me see. It won't run if you do it that way.
Yeah, because 1 is less than. So should I just flip it again?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other way though, like it's you're gonna have like a syntax thing.
Oh, are you saying like I should just like switch these?
It should be less than or equal to, but then the caret should be less than.
So less than?
Yeah, that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So now you have this, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna run. But then now you want to define the body of your loop, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
and because you want to make this triangle. So you know how you have like an x and a y, in a sense. Like,
Yeah. So
you-
like these are my X's and Y's.
exactly. The one of them is gonna be your maximum number for both.
Okay, so loop 2.
Is your maximum, and then loop C is like x. So you need to define like another variable for your y, in a sense.
So I could do like do I do like another like loop 3 is equal to 3?
Yeah, Moven. Yeah, it's always good to input something there. We don't usually correct it all the way, but just to attempt each individual one, like section.
Oh.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, you do that, but I think you have to start it the same way. You have to initialize them like 1 to 7. So like the first one, the x is 1, and then the y can be like 1, 2. It starts out as 1. So loop C is 1, right? And then your
Yeah.
next counter, I guess it usually should start as 1.
Okay. So I just I don't know. Like do I just leave it at 1?
You have loop C, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
that's only like your x. You need another counter to define this triangle. So you need another counter that equals 1. That make
like another. Okay, so like
okay.
so another loop that equals 1.
Yeah. And then so that's good. And then so now you have x and y. And then when you're trying to like make like patterns like this is definitely a pattern. You have these two values that's going to be kind of like your x and y. This is where you finally define your double while loop. So the first while, right, was comparing. It's going from an initial value to the final value, right? 7, right?
Yeah.
But then thinking about it, like what else do we want to compare? So that's gonna go on your second while loop. Is what else are you gonna compare besides like comparing each like x and then your loop C and loop 3 to 7? What else should you compare? That's gonna be your second while loop.
Like where, like the middle.
Yeah. So inside this first while loop, you need to have a second while loop.
So but to create that second while loop, do I do while again?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Like this is fine, like just underneath it like that?
Yeah, I usually align it. So like, it'll work, but then I usually align it to the condition, to the you have loop C, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or space. It doesn't matter. As long as it's indented. It'll work that way. For me, I usually align it to the condition. Anyways, yeah. So yeah, just define what do you think is your next comparison?
Well, I guess I'll just do loop 3. So I haven't compared that.
Yep, that's good.
2. Cool.
Yeah. So you know how it's always good to test it this way, but you know how like you define loop C to the final number, loop 2.
Yeah.
Um, you should also compare like each one, like
Oh, like
yeah, there, yeah, yep, yeah.
okay.
And then so now you have these conditions, and then now you want to know, okay, how do I print it, right? How do I print this out? So thinking about it, yeah, I'll help you in a bit. So if you're printing this, like, what do you think you're gonna do?
Do I just write print items
Yeah, but
or
what?
print loop?
Yeah, print loop, and then which one?
2 or something?
Okay. 2 is your final number.
Okay, so should I start with my first number so you could do like print?
Yeah, because what you're trying to do is that loop C is what you're trying to increase, right? Like you're going from 1 to 7. So that's why you want to print each iterate, each counter, loop C, or loop C, loop 3, whichever one. But in this case, you're gonna print one that's gonna be your horizontal or your X, and then the other one is gonna be your Y. So now you're printing loop C, right?
Yeah.
But do you know how to do it horizontally? Now you have to print out some spaces.
No.
I don't think this was covered. I was gonna cover this in the demo, but I kind of just went through it. I'll just tell you because of time. But you know how you have loop C, right? Print loop C.
Mhm.
Technically, you could put it as like, end, like comma and then end. I didn't cover this. So I think this will be good to show for the class. So loop C, then comma and like inside the print, inside print, yeah, and then you put end, like end, like ending. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. And then what are you trying to print inside? Is you're trying to print a space. So you equals like a string that's a space. The end is equals a string that's a space. But it has to be an equals, not like a comparison. Okay. So now you want to ask, I'm printing the space, but then how do I increase that counter, this counter that I have? That's gonna be your next line. Like how do you increase it? The loop C. Yeah, Lauren, I'll help you in a bit. Yep, so that's good. So that takes care of one part. That's your horizontal. And then now you want to think about going vertical is let me, okay, that's fine. So now you want to print your different, like, so the next one is what are you gonna print for your outer loop? So I guess this is loop 3.
For my outer loop.
Yeah, you took care of loop C, which is your inner loop.
Wouldn't I do the same thing? Like just add 1 to my loop 3?
Yeah, you would, but then not yet. Yeah. So adding 1 is when you're done with performing something. So you have to print something out before that.
Oh.
You have to, yeah.
Like you said, I have to print something out before this?
Yeah, because every time you're adding something, it doesn't really print And then what you want to do is print this pattern, right? You want to print a pattern out, yeah.
So do I say print loop C again?
So you've already used loop C.
So I could print like anything else, like loop 3.
Here, try this. Try that, and then show me, and then what I can help you after. So let's test it out first. Put loop 3, and then what are you gonna put next?
Oh, and then do the same thing where I would end it at the space.
Exactly. You would not. In this case, you don't need to do that because you're doing the vertical. You only put the end when you're doing horizontal, like you want to print it horizontally.
Oh, okay. So then for the vertical, what would I put?
For the vertical is you just put in loop 3. That's it.
Oh, so I leave it like that, like empty like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You just leave it as loop 3, not like without everything else.
Oh, like
yeah.
oh, okay. So I delete everything.
Yeah. And then okay, now what did like after you printed something, what do you want to do next? It's very similar.
Do I just keep repeating?
Like so.
Like this again.
So loop C, you've done it right. You've increased the counter.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do the same thing to loop 3.
Oh, so I'll just
try that.
So I just print out group C.
So you've already so we're not trying to print something here because you've already printed something. We're just trying to move on to the next one. So like you know how like you had loop C and you've increased it.
Yeah.
You have to do the same thing with loop 3.
Oh.
Yeah.
So would it be like, would I do the same formatting like that I did here? But with
you only need to do like one more thing. You just need to add in like the counter increase for loop 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Loop 3. Okay. Equals loop 3 plus 1.
Yeah, try that out.
Okay. And then I have an error.
Yeah, so this is very typical. So this says indentation error, right? Indentation error.
Yeah, right here.
No, like you know how like when you're aligning, you know that the second while loop that you have?
Yeah.
And then everything is aligned to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there you go. So that's what you have to do. So the first print that you have, oh snap. You have to. Can you press the square? You need to stop it. I think.
This just
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I think you're good to go because sometimes when it shows this, that means it's an infinite loop, and you're gonna have some issues later on. But let's see if it works. You know your first loop, the loop C.
Yeah. Wait. What do I do to the first loop? I just rerun it.
Okay, stop it again. It's doing the infinite loop. Okay, so you know this loop C, the loop C that you have.
Yeah.
Try to indent loop C. The loop C equals loop C plus 1. Indent that one. And then try print that, or like execute. Try to okay.
Okay. And I get all these numbers.
Let me see. That's weird. That's how I did it. Let me see. Loop 3.
Restart and run all or something.
Try to let me see. So you had the while loop there. try to indent your print and loop.
Okay, so indent that too. And then now I will do it.
That is. Hold on a sec. Yeah, this, like, for the most part, you're always wanting to like debug it, but yeah, you're always gonna get some issues sometimes.
Okay.
So one way I can say is, you know that second counter that you have?
Yeah, this loop 3.
Yeah. Try to put it inside your while loop.
Inside my while loop.
Yeah, between the first while loop and the second while loop.
Okay, like that.
And then let me see. You know your loop 3, loop 3, and it's outside your while loops. The
Like,
loop 3 equals 1.
what do you mean? I'm sorry.
Loop 3 equals 1. In the beginning where it says loop _ 3 equals 1.
Oh yeah, right here.
Yeah. Let me see. Which one is your inner one actually? So your inner one is your loop 3, right? Yeah, that's your inner one. So put that inside the after your first while loop.
Like I did here, or
No, like
put it right here. Like,
right after. So you know how you have while loop C less than or equal to loop 2?
yeah. So just do it. Like do it instead of loop.
Don't do it instead, but like do it on the next line. Do it on the next line.
Like below or something.
Yes.
Loop 3.
Yeah, equals 1, and then take that out of the loop into the loop
The
3
top.
equals 1. Yeah, take
Okay.
that out. And so I would probably put the let's see, the while loop, the second while loop that you have.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, you need to put the print loop 3, the print loop 3, because now you're trying to print something before you even iterating. So the second while loop, put it after loop 3 equals 1.
Okay, so
The second while loop 3.
Put. I'm sorry. What was the other part that you said?
Okay, so the second while loop, put it after you define loop 3 equals 1.
After.
Yeah.
Like here. Like there. I'm sorry. Am I doing it right?
Okay, let me see. So you know how you had like after your first while loop, you had loop 3 equals 1.
Yeah, like here, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put the while loop 3 condition after that, or like below that. So after like your second while loop 3, put it below the loop 3 equals 1. Yeah.
So here below this, do loop 3 equals 1 again.
Take out that loop 3 equals 1. You defined it twice.
Okay.
What you could do is, do you take this while loop, the second while loop you have, put it after loop 3 equals 1.
The second while loop. What is it? Oh, so this one.
Yeah, put it after loop 3 equals 1, where you define that one. Yeah, because you want to put, you don't want to start printing if you don't have your while loop conditions. Okay, take that out. Yeah, and then what you can do is so this print loop 3. Now you have this print loop 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this loop 3 equals loop 3 plus 1.
Yeah.
indent both those and align it with the condition on loop 3. So print loop 3, yeah, and then in the print loop 3, the other, the print loop 3, align it with that.
This one?
Not that one. The other one, print loop 3.
Align like that?
Yeah, but make sure it's aligned with indent both of those. Yeah, make sure you indent print loop 3 and loop 3 equals loop 3. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you know how like
like
not that one.
Okay.
So you know how you have print loop 3 and then loop 3 equals loop 3 plus 1.
Print loop 3. Yeah, right here.
Indent both of those. Yeah, indent them, both of them. And then the second print loop C and loop C equals loop C plus 1. Unindent those, like backwards. Yeah. Yep. And then the other one too.
Okay.
All right. Try run it.
Nothing happens. Okay.
Oh, I see what you did. So. Okay, that's not on. So you're almost there. You're almost there. You just have to switch two things.
Okay.
So the one thing is, you know how like you have this loop 3,
Mm-hmm.
and loop 3 is your inner.
Yeah.
So put loop 3, and you have in your loop C, like print. You know how you have like and equals, and then you have this space. The and equals, and then you have the space.
And equals, and then I have.
Yeah, in your loops, print loop C equals and equals like string. The second print loops. You know this and yeah, exactly, yeah. So take that. Take that out and put it where loop 3 is.
Where loop 3 is.
Print loop 3. Put that n equals.
And
and equals, and then whatever
print.
You just had, and then space.
Okay. And here, do I just delete all of that?
And then just delete the equals and the comma.
Okay.
And then let me see. Let me before you run it. Let me see.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. And then loop 3. Okay, that's your inner. Okay, and then run it. You're almost there, right?
Yeah, it looks exactly the same.
Yeah, so since you're almost there, and then I think we're pretty much past the time, try to experiment with this, and then get what you have. Yeah. Yeah, that's totally fine. Usually it's very iterative.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Actually, Lauren, you can't share your screen, right?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay, I guess we can just talk about it.
Okay.
Let's see. What do you have any other you have other questions?
I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
Just starting the lab,
Okay.
at the time I got to the part when it said like call them my list and my tuple,
Yeah.
underneath that, when it said type my list, it won't let me delete anything in there, but it keeps saying like, I don't know, it just says like out 5 tuple and then underneath the next one out 6 tuple, and I can't do
Okay.
anything with
Let
it.
me try to access since you can't share. So you're talking about the lab, right? You said.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just open that up.
I didn't even do the first assignment because I had no idea what was going on and I had a mental breakdown about it, so
It's
I need
totally.
help.
Yeah. I'll do my best. Let me see. So coding lab 3, and then okay, my list, my tuple. You're talking about that, the my list, my tuple.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, what it wants you to do is like you have to create it. Do you know what a list and a tuple is?
I assume I know what a list is, but tuple, I have no idea what that is.
Okay, were you in the? Did you come in the beginning? Like what?
I had other class stuff to do, so I was late.
Oh shoot, I can actually send you my my demo. I was defining this all the way in the beginning.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let me just send you my. I'll define it right now, but just in case you need it, I'll just send you my email.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so here you go, and then so what you could do here, so a list is pretty much the same as a tuple. They're exactly similar. Um, but then how you define them is different. So you know how in class they talked about putting like different data types inside a list, right? Like we talk about putting
Yeah.
numbers inside a list, yeah. So you could put this both in a tuple and a list. The only thing that you have to do different is if you're defining my list, you need to define it with 2 square brackets. But when you're doing a tuple, you have to define it with parentheses. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much. I mean, you've seen this in math. It's pretty much like a set of values or strings, whatever in this case. But
Okay.
then those two things, you can define them. You can put whatever inside, the same numbers, the same strings. The only two difference is if you're gonna define my list, you just need to put these things inside 2 square brackets, and then if you're doing my tuple, you have to define it as. Actually, why don't I just here? Hold on. Because I can still share my screen. All right, so you know how like I was just saying, so you have a list, right?
Mhm.
So you have a list here, and then so a list is just between 2 square brackets, and then a tuple is just between 2 parentheses. So that's
Okay.
that's how you define them. Did you have other questions?
Do the things in the lists and tuples have to have quotes around all of it, or is that just for words, or how does that work?
Okay. So for both of these, it could be words, it can be numbers, whatever. The it doesn't have to be like what like some people they thought you could only put a string inside a tuple, but you could technically put like if you're doing a string, you can put it inside a list and whatever data type you have. The only two differences, I mean, the only difference I say is just the the list is just defined with square brackets, and then the tuple is defined with parentheses. What you put inside is exactly the same either way.
Okay. Um, I just don't get like
even like the more basic things, like when it says assert is instance, like why are there spaces between some words and not others? What does that mean?
So which one? Assert or is instance?
Yeah, when it says assert is instance, underneath the my tuple my list thing that you just talked to me about.
Okay, let me see. Let me just stop this one and look at that. Okay, so that is just to check your, when you see assert and like my instance, it's just to check your code. That's why it's there. To explain it, like you don't. So when you're saying like assert and is instance, what this is saying is the assert we defined this a while back, but it's gonna assert whatever you put here as true, and if it's true, it doesn't print anything, and if it's false, it's gonna print out an error.
Okay.
So that's what an assert does. And in this is instance command, it takes in two arguments. So the first one here is whatever variable you define, like some list, some tuple. Okay, Manny, I'll get to that in a bit. But so you have this first variable, which is the variable that you define. And then the next thing inside is instance is what is that variable? What type is that? So if it's a list, then you put in list, and then it's gonna check if it is a list. If it's not, then it's false. But then altogether though, like what this is doing is just it's just checking if you define the right things. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then in the part of the lab where it says compare the types of these variables to your equivalent variables to confirm in the cell below, write in the type of the objects that you expect them to be and make sure the asserts pass. What do I have to do there? I just don't get what it's asking for.
Okay. So in compare types of these variables to your equivalent variables to confirm. In the cell below, write in type of objects that you expect them to be, and make sure the asserts pass. I guess to unpack that, you just have to, okay, two things I can say is like you have to have assert, and then next to that is your is instance. Now, as I define that, what do you think you're gonna put inside your is instance? Like is instance takes in your variable, and then it takes in the type of your variable that you have. So in this case, you have like let's see, like you create like my list or whatever my tuple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you put it inside like is instance, and then supposedly you want it to pass, and that's what it's saying. You want it to pass, right? Or not fail. Yeah, so it needs to be true. So you define some list or some tuple, and then make sure that you are defining it, as a list and a tuple. And then you type in assert is instance, and then you check those two, like some lists or some tuple, my list, and then you put in that variable and then the keyword list or tuple. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Okay, let me see. Let me just here. It's easier if I. Okay, hold up. I can show you exactly what I mean, but
So whenever I assert something, do I always put assert is instance or no?
when you're trying to assert something, you don't have to put is instance to it. You could just put an assert, but in this case, you want to use it together because you want to check if that variable is, so do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Oh, what was that? Oh, hold up. Oh, here you go. Okay, so you know how you have assert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just define this. My list. And you have like 1, 2, 3. And then you had assert. And this is usually how you do it if it doesn't fail. But like, so you have my list and then assert and then is instance. And then you want to check here, is my list, the variable you define, this is what you put in here, is it a list? And if it's a list, it shouldn't print anything. If it, for example, what if this is not defined correctly? And then you put in like, you put in this in like, you make a tuple, but then you're assigning it to my list. And now you want to check if it's actually a list, but it's a tuple. Then you're gonna get an error here, right?
Yeah.
But what this is doing, this assert is instance, is just checking the variable that I defined, is it really a list? And if it is, then it doesn't print anything. Right? And then if it's a tuple, if it's a tuple, like, so for example, this one, this is what it wants you to do. You just do this, and then you put in the variable you define, whatever you named it, and then you do that. Does that make sense? Because like it's just pretty much checking if you know how to write a list and a tuple.
Okay. And then for the part that says the assert is instance some list, write in type here, what would I put there for that?
Let me see. What is that after?
It's under declaring collections towards the top.
Okay.
Underneath the part that says run me, the cell below that.
Yeah. So in this cell you have to define what is your list. You know that one that I shared, like my list, my tuple.
Yeah.
Or you can define something else because you've already used that up top. Just put in some other name, and then like for example, some list, some tuple, and then define a list and a tuple. And then does it say print it?
I don't see. I don't know.
Okay.
In the cell above it, it does, but not in this part.
Okay. So I guess yeah, just what it wants you to do is declaring them as bracket and then parentheses. Just define it. Declaring is just okay. You have some list variable on tuple, and then make those lists like equals a list and a tuple. Does that make sense? And then in this code block, you just have to define that, and then when it says assert is instance, you insert what I just wrote using those variables.
Okay.
Yeah. So the point of this is just if you know how to define a list and a tuple, and then checking if you're gonna get an error. So what you should get is no error when you run assert this instance.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. Let me see, Manny. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure. I was seeing my thing. Was messing with it for a second. Yeah. Screen. And yeah, share.
All right.
So, this thing is messed up right now. I should fix it.
Okay.
This.
I didn't actually. I wasn't tracking the chat. What did you have other? What was your main question? I guess.
Well, my main question was this, like these that you have to like mess with the loops, right?
Okay.
So, like, why do we need something that has break or continue like this one? I'm gonna like select it right now. What's the point of a break and a continue here? I don't understand. Yeah.
Okay, that one. I mean, you know what they do, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, it's just testing if you know how to do it. I mean, that's what this is really. Like.
So I should just write like a loop that breaks and continues.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Yeah.
Okay. That was it?
Yeah, that was it, honestly.
Okay, man. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. How do I stop? Pause share. Stop share.
Okay, I think we're good. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you on Friday.